Good afternoon, everybody. Happy Monday to all of you. Let me begin, if I can, just by you can sort of see it with some of the banners and the large fish out in front of the State Department, that this is a big week for the department, because on Thursday and Friday we're going to be hosting our third Our Ocean Conference, which we started 2 years ago with the meeting that took place in Chile, interrupting this, and now this will be the final one for me as secretary. But happily, other countries have viewed this as an important enough initiative that for the next 3 years, there are hosts who will be announced at the meeting on the weekend, on Thursday and Friday. We have almost 40, I think it's about 40 ministers, foreign ministers, about 25 or so environment ministers. That is a large contingent of ministers who are coming here because of the global interest and commitment to this endeavor. And I think it's going to be a very important set of substantive, impressive announcements that will be made in the course of those 2 days. One of the reasons for this is that this is an issue that literally affects everybody on the planet. And it should be at the top of the global agenda, and that is where President Obama and the State Department are trying to put it in the course of these last 3 years. Second, let me make a quick comment about good news, because obviously we know we live in a turbulent era, and too often there are one challenge or another about conflict that unfortunately doesn't bring good news. But I believe it's important to note a very important humanitarian accomplishment from late last week. I was going to mention it, but it was so late or early in the morning in Geneva that I didn't. But on Friday of last week, the last 280 members of the exiled Iranian opposition group, the Mujahideen-e-Khalq, or MEK as they're known, were moved out of Camp Liberty in Iraq, and their departure concludes a significant American diplomatic initiative that has assured the safety of more than 3,000 MEK members whose lives had been under threat. And as everybody remembers, the camp they were in had on many occasions been shelled. There were people killed and injured. And we have been trying to figure out the way forward. Well, the last 10 years have been filled with reminders of this challenge. I first became involved in this effort when I was in the Senate, and that is why during my first year as secretary, I appointed Jonathan Weiner, one of my longest serving and most trusted advisors, as our emissary to find a way to help the MEK be able to leave Iraq. After steady progress over a period of months, I visited Tirana earlier this year, and I discussed with the Albanian government how to assist in facilitating the transfer and the resettlement of the last group of MEK members from Camp Liberty. Albania has a proud tradition of protecting vulnerable communities, as it did during the Kosovo conflict, and in sheltering large numbers of Jews during World War II. I'm very grateful that in this case, too, Albania was willing to play an important humanitarian role. I also want to thank the governments of Germany, Norway, Italy, the UK, Finland, and other EU countries for helping to save the lives of the MEK. And this is a major humanitarian achievement. I'm very proud that the United States was able to play a pivotal role in helping to get this job done. Finally, I'd like to take just a few moments to review with you the latest developments in Syria and I think you all are familiar with the agreement itself, but let me just quickly kind of summarize what Russia and the United States agreed on, which is a plan that we hope will reduce violence, ease suffering, and resume movement towards a negotiated peace and a political transition in Syria. Now, the key elements of the plan, just so everybody is very clear about it, are first, the resumption of a nationwide cessation of hostilities that excludes only al-Qaeda affiliate al-Nusra and Daesh. Now, this renewed cessation of hostilities went into effect today, our time, not our time, but today, about noon our time, at sundown in Syria a few hours ago. And the earliest reports are that there's some reduction in violence, as well as a few reports of fighting here and there, though it is far too early to draw any definitive conclusions, and I am not drawing any definitive conclusions. I will say that there is a report that just crossed my desk from Reuters that the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said that major conflict zones in Syria were calm after the ceasefire took effect at 7 p.m. on Monday. Their quote is, "Calm is prevailing." The director said, giving an early assessment. I repeat, early assessment. And there will undoubtedly be reports of a violation here or there, I'm confident, but that's the nature of the beginning of the ceasefire almost always. The second thing that we agreed on is that humanitarian assistance needs to begin to flow. Now, that can take a day or two or so. It depends, but the UN has indicated that they are prepared and preparing to take those deliveries in. And it is important, and a very important part of this equation, that access to humanitarian goods take place. That includes all of the embattled neighborhoods of Aleppo over a period of time. Now, we spent a lot of the last few weeks developing very specific arrangements to enable the passage of aid to Aleppo through the two main access points, Costello Road and the Ramusa Gap. I don't think I have to spell out for you how urgent this assistance is. In some cases, literally the difference between life and death for tens of thousands of people. Third, we provided a provision that as long as there is a sustained period of reduced violence, and increased humanitarian access, and by that we mean 7 consecutive days, the United States and Russia will set up a joint implementation center to facilitate coordinated military action in response to the threat posed by al-Nusra and Daesh. Now, under that arrangement, as soon as U.S.-Russia strikes begin, then the Syrian regime will be prohibited from flying combat missions over areas in which the legitimate opposition is present, or al-Nusra present, as defined by the map that has been agreed upon between Russia and the United States with the regime's consent, according to Russia. Now, these areas have been clearly and jointly defined by our experts. What this would mean is it would take Syrian warplanes and their barrel bombs out of those skies and prevent the regime from doing what it has done so often in the past, which is to bomb a civilian apartment or hospital and claim that in doing so they were really targeting al-Nusra. And I would hope that everyone who has deplored these kinds of attacks, and that should be everyone, period, is going to support the effort to bring these assaults to an end by virtue of providing for the calm and allowing these 7 days of reduced violence to take place. Now, I want to be clear. As important as each of these measures is in their own right, they are designed not for the purpose of having a ceasefire for the purpose of having a ceasefire. They are designed in order to provide a period of calm that restores some sense of seriousness, of purpose, to the Russian effort and the willingness of Assad to go to the table and negotiate. This is designed to bring people to the table in Geneva in order to get under the auspices of the UN and begin to negotiate a political transition and the restoration of a peaceful and united Syria. Now, this afternoon, I reiterate my call to all parties to observe the cessation of hostilities. This is an opportunity for Syria, an opportunity for all of the people who've been under siege. And it's an opportunity for a political, diplomatic process under the auspices of the United Nations to take the plan that Staffan de Mistura has developed and begin to work and see if it is possible, to have a diplomatic and political solution. I want to praise the opposition's courage in embarking on this arrangement and call on them to separate themselves from al-Nusra in those areas where intermingling has been a problem. And to everybody concerned, I emphasize that every element of this arrangement is based on the reciprocal actions that need to be taken, not simply the promises that have been made. Promises are one thing. It's the actions that will define whether or not this will be able to come together. If there is no compliance with the cessation of hostilities and no fulfillment of the principle of humanitarian access, then this arrangement, including the Joint Implementation Center, will not go forward. Now, I want to be clear as well that for all of the doubts that exist, and we know there are many, there will be challenges in the days to come. We expect that. I expect that. I think everybody does. But despite that, this plan has a chance to work. We know that Russia has stood up in the person of the Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and said that Assad has agreed to this plan. And they have obviously joined us in accepting responsibility for trying to put this into place. And we know that in Syria, as writ large, the desire for an end to the killing and the suffering is widespread. So there are a lot of people who will welcome an Eid gift of the moment of moving back from the daily destruction and inhumanity that has characterized Syria for the last 5 years. We know that the international community, including leading Arab countries, Turkey, Iran, Russia, Europe, and the United States together, have all come together on a set of principles aimed at reducing the violence and making possible a Syrian-led political transition. And we know that the cessation of hostilities that went into effect last February did provide a glimpse of what a better future could look like. People returned to the streets for a while, went to cafes. They were able to even demonstrate on occasion. And they were able to go to work and attend school without fear until people resorted back to the habits that we're trying to end. Over the weekend, I read a story that referred to the U.S.-Russia plan as, quote, flawed and full of caveats. And I have to say to all of you, sure, this is less than perfect. This is perhaps one of the most complicated places in the world. But let me ask you, flawed compared to what? Compared to nothing? Compared to daily violence that absolutely guarantees a future of even more violence and possible sectarian explosion in the region? What we have been seeing in Syria day after day, week after week, month after month is a lot worse than flawed. And it has been, it remains a profound human tragedy and a stain on the international community's ability to be able to bring people to a table to try to negotiate an outcome for something where everybody knows there is no military solution. There's just escalation, if kinetic is the route people choose to go. Now, I've been in public life for more than 4 decades now, and I have never seen a more complicated or entangled political and military, sectarian, somewhat religiously overtoned issue than what exists in Syria today. There are a bunch of wars going on, a bunch of different tensions between people, and you can cite them, whether it's Kurd and Turkey, or Kurd and Kurd, or Sunni Shia, or Assad versus, or others versus Assad, or countries that don't get along with each other in the region. This is a very toxic mix of interests and of agenda. So this catastrophe developed step by step, folks, and it can only be reversed on a step-by-step basis. The U.S.-Russia plan is designed to advance the process of trying to reduce the violence so that we can get people to a table where they don't just point to the bombs that are dropping on them, which prevent them from negotiating, or the food that is being prevented and medicine from being delivered, which prevents them from negotiating. This is the best thing we could think of, and President Obama has gone the extra mile here to try to find a way to see if we can bring people to the table and end the violence while they go to the table to try to settle this. We believe that this is the only realistic and possible solution to this conflict, is ultimately a political outcome. I urge all the parties to support it, because it may be the last chance that one has to save a united Syria. So I thank you, and I'd be pleased to respond to a couple questions.
We'll start with Matt. We got time for two, folks. Matt,
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. You probably saw or heard President Assad's comments this morning, or at least from earlier today, in which he said that he was going to continue to strike at terrorists wherever they were and drive them out of the country. Given that and the fact that from what you just said, it appears that his air forces are not grounded for the next 7 days, that they will be able to continue operations. How exactly are you going to gauge this reduction in violence that you're trying to achieve when they, and I think it's a when rather than an if, when they continue attacks on Nusra, that they say are on al-Nusra, but which you have said in the past are really against the opposition? How do you gauge that reduction of violence? If you can't do that, I'm not sure. Can you explain how the next 7 days is supposed to be different from the last 7 months? And then,
Yeah.
if you are able to gauge a reduction in violence, it's okay, and the JIC gets set up. What is the consequence for a violation after that period? Is it just that the JIC dissolves and there is no more U.S.-Russia cooperation? Thanks.
If what?
If there is supposing you get the 7 days of reduced violence, and the JIC gets set up, and then there is violation after that from the government or government side, is the only consequence that the JIC gets dissolved?
No. Well, let me go through each of those. First of all, it is a fact that under this agreement, except in the area that we have agreed on with the map, which is where the opposition is, and if Nusra happens to be there, then Nusra is included, that Assad is not supposed to be bombing the opposition because there is a ceasefire. Now, he is allowed and will be able, outside of that area, after, if the JIC gets set up, to target Nusra, but that will be on strikes that are agreed upon with Russia and the United States in order to go after them. So the issue is the 7 days, which you've raised. And during these 7 days, there is a demand that there be a reduced level of violence and calm and access. And that is to the satisfaction of each of the parties, satisfaction of Russia, satisfaction of the United States. So yes, there's some discretion in that. And if we deem that Assad is using these days in order to continue the practice that I just cited of pretending to go after Nusra but bombing the opposition, we don't have 7 days of calm, folks. And so Russia here plays the critical role. Russia needs to make it absolutely clear to him that they want the 7 days and that he needs to abide by that. And if we have serious questions about it, we'll raise it with them. And we will not have 7 days of consecutive calm, and therefore we will not get to the Joint Implementation Center. Now, if we get to the Joint Implementation, and again, I want to repeat, Russia said Assad has agreed to this ceasefire and he has agreed to the terms of this agreement. So we need to see that, and we will measure that over the course of the next days. And finally, once the JIC, the Joint Implementation Center is working and functional, then there is a method for resolving within the JIC these questions about a violation and what has happened. It will not terminate it automatically immediately. That process can play out, but at any time, and there is a clear clause in the agreement, that either party believes this is being violated and the other side is not acting in good faith, either party has the ability to simply withdraw without and terminate the arrangement. So there has to be a display of earnest, good faith effort to try to make this work. And we will judge that very quickly, I think. I mean, already our teams are continuing the efforts within the Geneva cell, which has already been established. I'm told the meetings today were very productive, very professional, very constructive, and they're talking about how they proceed in the next days. And we will see what happens with respect to the next 7 days. But Russia has a very clear responsibility. We also have a very clear responsibility with respect to the opposition. And we've been having those discussions with the opposition. This is a time for them to separate from Nusra and to make it clear that they do believe in trying to put to test the political process. This is a test. Can you get to Geneva? Can you put together a legitimate political negotiation, which can only happen in the context of a reduction in the level of violence? And we'll see where it goes. We're going to measure it every single day, and we'll see where we are. It's certainly too early to make that measurement today. It's only a matter of a few hours.
Last question for the Secretary goes to Barbara.
Thank you. I wanted to ask you a bit more about separating between al-Nusra and the opposition. You said there would be zones that have been set up, but the fact is that there's a lot of intertwining between opposition groups and al-Nusra, and these are the most effective military alliances. So what steps will be taken to persuade the opposition to pull back from that? And just with regards to what you were saying about the test of the political process, and it's related to this question of the opposition, I mean, does this arrangement, do you sort of accept the idea that Syrian regime will go into talks in a stronger position? Because if the US and Russia join together to hit the Syrian regime's most effective enemies, that's ISIS and al-Nusra, and at the same time the opposition holds its fire, that will in effect be the result of how the ceasefire ends up.
Well, it's a good question, and let me be very clear in my answer to the second part of it when I come to it. But first, let me just say that in terms of the separation, you're absolutely correct that in some places there has been what people have been referring to as marbleization of opposition with al-Nusra. And yes, al-Nusra has been, quote, effective, but al-Nusra is al-Qaeda. Al-Nusra is a sworn enemy of the United States of America and of the Western world, of the Allies, and of others in the region. And they have an external plotting entity that is plotting as I speak for attacks against some of our allies, friends, and ourselves. So we cannot abide by, and President Obama has made it very clear, we can't somehow adopt the moral hazard of just because they fight fiercely saying, oh, we're going to have somehow allow al-Qaeda to be the tip of our spear with respect to Assad. That would be crazy and ultimately self-destructive, because you're going to have to turn around and deal with it. And it might even get out of control and produce something where you have a level of extremism and a level of terror and of the attraction of terrorists that you actually make matters worse in Europe, in the region, and elsewhere. So we're not going there. That is exactly why the president thought it was worthwhile making it clear to Nusra, Jabhat al-Nusra, and making it clear to Daesh they're outside of this, and they are outside of this cessation. Now, it is not advisable for the opposition, who have their support from some of the countries that are threatened by Nusra, to be playing with Nusra on an ongoing basis, that is a losing proposition. Because if we get the process moving forward adequately, it is clear that Russia and the United States are determined to take on terrorists. Because we have a mutual interest in doing that, and in terminating ISIL, Daesh, as fast as possible. So I believe that the opposition understands this, and I don't believe that Assad is sort of advantaged from that position. Why do I not believe that? Because if the talks fail, then it is going to go back to an increased effort against Assad, an increased amount of weapons, an increased amount of fighting, and Syria goes to an even darker place. And we can't stop that. That's what we've told the Russians. That's what we've told people in the region, that the danger of where Syria is going is that it gets beyond the ability to create a united and hold together a united and non-sectarian and a secular Syria, which can pull itself together, hold itself together. And so Russia actually has an interest in not seeing this go there. And Assad has an interest in not seeing this go there. And if the talks fail, if there's an inability to pull together over a period of time, by the way, it's not going to happen overnight. That's a long and difficult negotiation. But if there is a way to find a way forward to have a political resolution here, that is the best way for everybody to push back against the terrorists and to hold together a united Syria. So the basic equation confronting Assad doesn't change because he holds some new territory in the north of Aleppo or the south of Aleppo or somewhere else. It doesn't change. So what? He holds it. The fundamental issue is still going to be, how do you make peace? How do you unite Syria? How do you bring these people together, no matter where they are, and stop the fighting, except against the hardcore terrorists who've been designated? So I believe that there is no great advantage. As we've seen for 3.5 years, everybody's always fighting for that last moment of advantage. And then you have a ceasefire. Does the fundamental equation change? No, not in the least. And I don't believe it will now. So I don't believe that they go in. The same fundamental challenge politically exists, no matter where Assad is at this point. Now, it may be harder for Russia or Iran or somebody to persuade Assad to take steps, but if this war is going to end, he's going to need to take steps. And I believe President Putin and others in the region understand that. Now, with respect to Syria regime, that answers the second part of the question. So,
Can you clarify something super quick, Mr. Secretary? You said that it's not advisable to the opposition to be playing with Nusra. It's a losing proposition because of their allies that are supporting them, but also because they know that you're looking to take, the opposition understands that you're looking to take on terror groups. Are you suggesting that if these mobilization if they don't separate themselves, that they could get caught in the crossfire?
we've made it very, very clear. And no, we're going to be very careful and deal with Nusra in ways that the Joint Implementation Group will allow us to do. But if they join with Nusra in offensive action and attacks, then they've made a choice to be with Nusra, and then they clearly run the risk.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
We're gonna roll straight in. He was just walking him out. He should be back in like 2 seconds.
Okay, everybody. I had to give him time to lower this thing. I don't have anything to open with, so Matt, do you have anything more?
I don't have anything on Syria, so if there's anyone left who wants to ask about Syria, go ahead.
I'm shocked that you want to ask about Syria. Why don't we go to you and then you, go ahead.
Okay, Russia, I have two questions on Syria. Russia has said that this ceasefire, which the Secretary just discussed, or cessation of hostilities, also applies to the YPG and the Free Syrian Armies. Is that correct? Or would it also involve stopping the fighting between essentially the Turks and the Kurds in Syria?
Well, again, remember what this is, it's not changed in character. Cessation of hostilities, which was put in place in February, applied, or supposed to apply, to everybody but those groups designated by the UN as terrorists inside Syria. And there are two. There's Daesh and there's al-Nusra, which the Secretary made very clear is al-Qaeda. It's al-Qaeda in Syria. And so if the cessation of hostilities is implemented, if it's observed, then the only two groups that may continue to be targeted by anybody are those two.
So the cessation of hostilities would include Turkish-Kurdish confrontation?
Well, we have long said that we don't want to see, and I said this a couple weeks ago, that we don't want to see violence or clashes between Turkish forces and Kurdish forces. What we've said, and I'll say it again today, is that we want them as members of the counter Daesh coalition to fight Daesh. That's where we want their energies to be applied.
And thank you. And my second Syria question is that the Kurdish National Council of Syria, as well as the Assyrians, have protested a document that was put out by the Saudi-backed opposition, the HNC, and that's their framework for a transitional period in Syria. The complaint is that it's Arabist-based and Islamist-based and doesn't take account of the interests of minorities in Syria.
Yeah.
Do you have a comment on that? And are you concerned that leaving so much to countries like Saudi Arabia, we're reproducing the problem that we had in Afghanistan after the 1980s, the war with the Soviets, and Pakistan was in charge, and the result was not something very pretty?
I'm not quite sure what you mean by the last part of your question, but I will say we continue to be grateful for Saudi Arabia's leadership here in working with the HNC and the moderate opposition to help them coalesce around guiding principles. Now, look, I haven't seen the protest specifically. I'm aware of it. I'm aware of the basic gist of it. I haven't seen it, and it wouldn't be right for me to go through it line by line. What I would tell you is this, that nothing's changed about our view here in the United States, and I think I can say the same for members of the ISSG, that what we want to see in Syria is a country that's unified, that's whole, that's pluralistic, that includes and is representative of all Syrians, no matter what their walk of life, no matter what religion they practice or what ethnicity they represent. That's what we said from the outset. And that is the goal that the United States and the international community is going to continue to pursue.
I guess my question that wasn't clear, and I apologize. After the Soviet war against the Soviets ended in Afghanistan in '89, the United States left it to Pakistan to kind of craft the government for Afghanistan, and we have what we're all familiar with. And essentially what Pakistan was doing was exporting its own problematic ruling principles to Afghanistan.
Yeah.
And if you let the Saudis do the same thing, you could end up with the same result. And my question is, shouldn't the United States perhaps be more involved and less left to the countries like Saudi Arabia?
I think the United States is very involved here in what we want to see for the future of Syria. We are co-founders of the International Syria Support Group, and the Secretary, you just heard him talk about how deeply engaged we're going to continue in this process going forward, and about trying to reach a political solution here. So first of all, nobody's talking about ceding American leadership here. Number two, I would say that nobody's talking about having Saudi Arabia as sort of a lone single custodian of the future of Syria. We want the future of Syria to be determined by Syrians. That's why we're working so hard to find a political solution to this civil war, so that the Syrian people can determine what their government looks like at the end of this transitional process. And an important point that the Secretary made earlier is that the whole reason we're working through these kinds of arrangements now with the Russians isn't just to get a ceasefire for a ceasefire's sake. It is to create the kind of space and the conditions that will allow Staffan de Mistura to bring the sides back to the negotiating table in Geneva and try to get the political process started. Nobody wants to see what we've seen the last 3 iterations where nothing got resolved. And why did nothing get resolved? Because there was still violence and innocent people were still being killed. So this isn't about ceding the leadership or the direction of Syria to any one country except for Syria itself and the Syrian people. Okay? Yeah.
Just a few on Syria and also on the Philippines.
How
which
many
I
is
can
a few?
ask later. Two on
Two,
Syria.
right,
Two
right.
that I came
Okay.
up with listening to Secretary Kerry. And later on the Philippines, will you take my Philippines questions as well? I just want to make sure.
Fire
Thank
away.
you. Thank you very much. So on Syria, how many groups, to your knowledge, have refused to abide by the ceasefire?
I'm not aware, at this point, we're not aware of any groups that have outright refused.
I saw reports that al-Sham refused to abide by the ceasefire. Does the U.S. have influence with that group?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen those reports as well, but again, I'd go back to what I said before. We're in 2 points. We're, as you might expect, in constant contact with the moderate opposition and have been throughout this process, up to the meeting in Geneva and then certainly in the hours and days since then. And again, we're not aware of any single group that has come out rejecting it or in opposition. Now, that said, and the Secretary talked about this as well, we understand that that certain of them have doubts, have concerns. We recognize that. That's why we're in constant contact with them. We also are taking a pretty clear-eyed approach here. I mean, nobody is saying for a moment that this isn't going to be difficult.
So you're in contact with moderate opposition. Is this specific group considered to be moderate opposition?
But again, I don't have the list of every group here, but Har al-Sham is not designated as a terrorist organization inside Syria, and so therefore it is a group that that we have maintained a level of contact with in terms of discussing what this arrangement means going forward. Okay?
Actually, I do have one on Syria. Sorry. Based on what the Secretary just said now, is it, he seemed to say, well, he didn't seem to say, he did say, that if and when you get this week-long reduction in violence and the JIC takes effect, that the United States and Russia could agree on places where Assad's Air Force could bomb or go after Nusra. That's what he said. He said he is allowed and will be able outside of that area if the JIC gets set up to target Nusra. But that will be on strikes that are agreed upon with Russia and the United States in order to go after them.
Yes.
Are you comfortable with that? I thought the whole idea was to ground the Air Force completely.
No, Matt, the idea was not to,
And that the only people who would be flying combat operations after the JIC got set up would be the U.S. and Russia, except for in the areas where ISIS is.
no, actually, that was not the understanding and was not part of the discussions throughout the process. The idea was not to, quote-unquote, ground Assad's Air Force everywhere all the time. The
Right.
objective was to limit their combat operations in such a way that they could not hit opposition targets or civilian targets, but that if they were able, willing, intending to target Nusra, which is outside the cessation of hostilities, that would still be permissible. But the whole purpose for the JIC is to allow for a measure of compliance and monitoring and pre-coordination of strikes that they would do against Nusra, so that it's not done without visibility of both Russian and U.S. planners.
Yeah, but 2.5 weeks ago, in Geneva, before the meetings in China, the idea, at least I thought it was the idea, and maybe I got this wrong, but it was that with the exception of ISIS, Assad's forces wouldn't be allowed to go after anybody, and that the only people who would go after Nusra in the safe zone, for lack of a better word, would be the U.S. and Russia. That's clearly wrong, right?
I think you were incorrect in surmising that. I think.
Or someone was incorrect in telling us, not just me, that, correct? Or it changed. I don't know. Maybe
No, I don't.
maybe
and I don't
something
believe,
changed between the.
I don't believe there's been any change to that. I mean, the understanding, well, as we work through this now for many weeks, the understanding was that that's why we wanted maps of designated areas, areas where we knew Nusra was predominant, areas where we know the opposition is predominant, and areas where they're marbled and mixed. And inside those three types of areas, Assad would not, that
Yeah, you wouldn't go after
he
anyone.
wouldn't go after opposition, or he wouldn't go after areas where it's mixed, because he's not capable of discrete, discriminate targeting. But as the Secretary said, in accordance with the JIC and the work of U.S. And Russian planners, we're not ruling out that Assad would be able to strike at Nusra. Again, Nusra is a UN-designated foreign terrorist organization. They are not party to the cessation. So there's really no grounds, and frankly, little purpose in trying to completely limit and restrict the Assad regime from hitting Nusra. The idea, though, is that if and when they did, there would be visibility, there would be transparency over that inside the
Yeah,
joint
but you guys
implementation
already
center.
say that he's not actually targeting.
Well,
Nusra.
exactly. I mean,
Well, what happens if the Russians come to you and say, okay, here's a target that we want to hit, and the Syrians want to hit it, and you guys say, well, no, it's mixed. Is it a 2-to-1 vote? Or you guys have,
well,
you can say
that
no?
was the purpose for poring over the maps
So you can
and the
stop it?
technicalities of those areas. Absolutely.
Okay, how exactly do you
Well,
do
look,
that?
I'm not going to go through chapter and verse of the way the JIC is going to operate. One thing, because their teams are discussing, as the Secretary said right now in Geneva, to set up
Yeah, but
the
basically
kinds
you-
of processes and procedures that
you
the
have
JIC would
no-
use.
You have no recourse, though. If they could bomb an area that they say is Nusra, and you guys say is marbleized, and there's zero consequence.
No, I didn't say that at all, Matt.
No, I know you didn't say that, but that's what the effect is.
No, it's not. It's not. Look, again, I don't want to get too much in the details here of procedure, because, again, those procedures are being worked out. But the whole idea of having designated areas and sharing information, targeting information in those areas where there's marbleized and areas where there's opposition, is to do exactly that, to limit, to restrict, to stop Assad from being able to go after opposition groups where they are.
Yeah, but
And-
my understanding of the entire thing was that you were going to ground Assad's air force in areas that in these so-called permissive, safe, no-fly zones. And that's clearly not what's happening here, because they are still going to be allowed to attack in areas that are, that may be opposition held, but with marbleized components.
No, no.
They won't?
It's not quite that simple. They will be permitted if, again, if there is a consensus here inside the JIC that to hit a designated, a known Nusra target. There's no prohibition under this arrangement for them to do that, but it will be with the visibility of both the United States and Russia beforehand.
But isn't it
But
already
on
under-
but wait a minute now. But on areas where they're mixed and marbleized, where we know there is opposition nearby or intermingled with, they won't be allowed to do that. That's the whole reason why we've got these designated areas where we know Nusra is dominant, where we know the opposition is dominant, and where it's mixed. The whole idea for having a discussion with the Russians about this, such as we have to this point, and will continue to have if the JIC gets set up, is to provide a level of certainty and visibility on where Assad would be able to fly. But there was never a point at which we said, at least I can't remember a time where we said that they were going to be grounded permanently forever and not allowed to fly. It's about flying combat missions against opposition and civilians that we want to restrict.
It was never that they were going to be entirely grounded. It was, though,
Right.
after the Geneva meeting 3 weeks ago, unless I was misinformed, and that's possible, that they would only be allowed to fly combat missions against ISIS, and that areas where and areas that are outside and against Nusra
Yeah.
and ISIS outside of these safe zones. But inside the safe zone, the understanding was that they wouldn't be able to fly at all. That the only people who would be able to strike at Nusra targets in the safe zone would be the U.S. and Russia.
You keep talking about safe zones, and maybe that's where we're getting hung up. I don't know what you mean by safe zone.
The area where it's held by the opposition, which
Or
you
it's
say
marbled.
includes Marbleized.
Which would,
Right.
yes, they would not, that's right. That is correct. They would not be able to strike in areas where we know the opposition is dominant or opposition controlled, or where there is the marbling, the intermingling, the mixing, because they're not capable of being discrete and discriminate about that.
That's different than what you said before, because what the secretary seemed to say was that inside the safe zone, is that the right
Yeah,
term?
no, it's not.
Okay, what's the right term?
There's your pre-designated areas.
The pre-designated areas, okay. Inside the pre-designated areas, is the Syrian Air Force allowed to target what, Nusra?
In those areas that we know are Nusra dominant, and where there's no opposition present, then yes. But it'll be on a case-by-case
But then
basis.
they're not in the pre-designated area. Those people are not, then that.
There are three types of pre-designated areas.
Yeah.
The whole reason that we've had this one.
Opposition, Marbleized,
And
and
Nusra.
Nusra.
In the areas where we know Nusra is dominant, since Nusra is a foreign terrorist organization, since
Yeah.
they're not party to the cessation of hostilities,
yeah,
okay,
but-
they'll be able to target Nusra. But it won't be
But-
without, it won't be unilaterally without the visibility of the joint implementation zone.
But you have visibility now, or at least you say you do, because you claim that they're not, that they're hitting the opposition, the moderate opposition, when they claim they're hitting Nusra.
Exactly.
That visibility
We-
exists now. I just don't I'm not sure that I understand what the point of this whole thing is.
Look,
If they can't,
because-
if they can
no,
still fly
it's
and
exactly-
attack areas that are in dispute,
But the reason,
and there's
but
without any
But
punishment.
right now, Matt, they're doing it, they're claiming they're going after Nusra, and they're really not, okay? By and large, and you know this, the bulk of their military activity, whether it's on the ground or in the air, has been against opposition, and it's been against civilians. And on the rare occasion when they have hit a Nusra target, because they have been coming under attack by Nusra, so I'm not saying they're not hitting them at all. But on the occasions when they have, they've been doing it unilaterally, or with sometimes the support of the Russian military, and there's been certainly no visibility on our side in terms of how they're doing it, when they're doing it, or how accurately they're doing it. So what the JIC will allow us to do, again, if it gets set up, and I'm not saying it will, there's two purposes here, and I think one is the coordination and sharing of information, but the second thing is compliance and enforcement of the cessation of hostilities. So if we get a JIC, it will give us, certainly the United States, much more visibility than we have right now into where those Nusra targets are and what Assad is going to be allowed to do to
How
target
does
them.
it give you guys more visibility into what
Because
the
because the Russians have influence over the regime, and the Russians will be able to share information with us inside the JIC,
But you know where they are already, don't you? Or at least you say you do.
which is why we had a
All right.
discussion
Well,
about
if and when
designated
we
areas.
get to next Monday and the JIC gets set up, I guess we can revisit this because
I would
now I'm
be happy-
completely confused. I have no idea, actually, but anyway,
Just to clarify, sorry.
go ahead.
By visibility, do you mean that you are going to know in advance where the Syrian government is going to
The
be?
idea
to
is
know in
to coordinate information, U.S. and the Russians, coordinate information on targeting in advance of operations. And while we don't have, obviously, any communication directly with Assad's military, nor do we intend to, we know that the Russians have influence over what they do, considerable influence. And I would point you back to what the secretary said, that that the Russians have assured us that Assad will abide by this arrangement. So
And
we'll see.
so my last one then, until next Monday, the regime, Assad's Air Force can continue to do what it's been doing, right?
No, not at all.
Well, the penalty is only that the JIC doesn't get set up if they don't, right?
If we don't see a mutually satisfactory level of reduced violence, and there's some discretion in there, as the Secretary said, then the joint implementation cell doesn't get stood up and the arrangement doesn't get
And
completed.
that is a consequence for the regime, how?
Well, because the Civil
They
War,
want to continue to
the
go
Civil
after
War
what
will
they say are
continue. And as
terrorists.
the Secretary said, it's hard to see that that's in anybody's interest.
Okay.
Thank you.
Can we change the subject?
I'm sorry?
Can we change the subject? Are we still?
No.
Okay,
I've
all
got a
right.
question about this issue of the Assad regimes and Air Force, airstrikes. And, first of all, what are the consequences if he does hit some of these marbleized areas and says that he's going after Nusra? I mean, what's
Well, the idea of having the Joint Implementation Center is so
I
that
understand
can't
the idea
happen.
is to prevent that from happening, but what if it does?
Well, then, as we said, and it's written right in the arrangement, that at any time, either side here can render the arrangement null and void, and it will be over. And if I don't want to get into hypotheticals here. I appreciate the desire to run through all the hypothetical situations. I don't think it's wise here at this very early stage to engage in that. Hang on a
Would the
second.
planes be shot
But
down or prevented?
I'm not
I mean,
going
it
to
seems like
engage in
there's a
military
prohibition. What
I'm
is the
not going to
prohibition?
engage in military hypotheticals. What I can tell you is that there is a provision here where either side, the U.S. or Russia, can pull out of this arrangement if we're not seeing it genuinely complied with by the other side and by the parties that each side influences. So we'll see. We'll see where it goes. But I'm not going to engage in hypotheticals about what if or what if that. I mean, the Joint Implementation Cell has something for both. For the Russians, it would, if implemented, give them a measure of coordination with the U.S. military that they don't have right now and that they have expressed an interest in. For us, it gives us a real shot at keeping Assad from barrel bombing and gassing his own people, as well as the opposition, and more critically, if a cessation of hostilities can be maintained and reduced violence can be established and sustained, and humanitarian access, get the opposition back to the table with the regime in Geneva under the UN, under UN auspices, and get a political process started. That's the real goal here.
Okay, so I also have a question about this issue of the opposition separating from al-Nusra. Because now you're saying that these marbleized areas, I guess that they can remain marbleized because they don't have to physically separate. But on Friday, Secretary Kerry said that if groups within the legitimate opposition want to retain their legitimacy, they need to distance themselves in every way possible from Nusra and Daesh.
Yeah.
And the people in the opposition are saying that in his statements on Friday, he talked about the opposition's legitimacy, but never talked about Assad's legitimacy or Assad having lost legitimacy.
We have made nothing.
And-
We've been nothing but clear about Assad's illegitimacy.
Well,
to
they're
govern Syria.
they're thinking that this looks like a shift in a policy, and that now the U.S. is working with, allowing Assad, expecting him to participate in this transition deal, and that it looks like a policy shift. So is it?
No.
But the problem is that if you have this situation where you and the Russians are going to potentially okay, Syrian Air Force strikes, then you're cooperating with a guy who 5 years ago, a little over 5 years ago, the President of the United States said no longer had legitimacy to lead. How is that not a shift?
We're cooperating with Russia, which has influence over the Assad regime. It's not that the United States is dictating the Assad Air Force's air traffic schedule. Okay,
You're not dictating it, but you're allowing them, you're saying it's okay for them to launch military operations.
But Matt, it's always been okay under the cessation of hostilities that was agreed back in February to target Nusra. Nobody ever said at any time that I can recall that it that it wasn't okay for air combat forces, be they Russian, or be they Assad's, to solely target a group like al-Nusra.
Yeah, but you put yourself in a position now where you're giving Assad the green light to
He's
launch
already
military.
had the green light to go after al-Nusra.
So you guys have been cooperating with Assad
No.
for years while
No.
saying that he has lost legitimacy?
No. There's been no cooperation with Assad, and there's not going to be cooperation with Assad. There's going to be cooperation and coordination with the Russian military, which has influence over Assad.
Right, and they're not later, so there's no link at all. You've separated yourself at
I
one
think
degree.
I've responded
but-
to it.
all right.
I've heard a response to the part of my question about the marbleization and whether that's
Yeah, actually,
supposed
I
to-
wanted to come back to you on that. I think the secretary, he said it again today, and there's, we understand that there are places where the opposition are in proximity to Nusra. And our message to the opposition hasn't changed at all. Obviously, we're going to continue to support them in their efforts, but we have been very clear about our concerns about physically co-locating themselves in or near Nusra locations, because Nusra is not a party to the cessation. And obviously, we don't want to see harm befall the moderate opposition. And as the Secretary said himself just a few minutes ago, we urge them to think carefully about where they are going to be geographically, just as much as we urge them to comply by all the particulars of this arrangement.
So to the opposition, that sounds like they need to cede territory to the regime and to the operations against Nusra.
No, it's not about ceding territory to the regime. It's about, again, if everybody abides by this, hang on, just please let me answer one of your questions before you jump in, okay? If everybody abides by the cessation of hostilities, there's not going to be any ceding or grabbing of additional territory. What we want to see over 7 continuous days is a reduction in violence that does not include territorial grabs or the need for ceding territory. That's not what this is about. It's about getting a level of reduced violence that can lead to the stand-up, the establishment of the Joint Implementation Cell.
So if you have a group that's marbled with Nusra and you're saying that basically that they need to either push Nusra out or back away from that space where they're marbled, because that area will become a target, then if they have to pull back, then they're backing up, they're retreating, right?
If you're asking, are we in support of them removing themselves geographically from where we know Nusra is? Absolutely. And we've been saying that for months now. There's nothing new here. But if everybody's abiding by the cessation of hostilities, that shouldn't be a problem. Yes, sir.
So this is kind of hypothetical, but let's say that the cessation gets upheld and that the JIC is established. I'm curious about the manner of military cooperation between the U.S. and Russia that's being proposed. As you certainly know, and as you've condemned, the Russians have done some bad things, even in Nusra-controlled territory.
Yeah.
Hospital bombings, right? So what procedures are in place to make sure they don't do that? Does the U.S. have a say in their targeting decisions?
Well, so a couple of things. Again, as the Secretary said, our teams are now beginning to have discussions about the modalities of how the Joint Implementation Cell will operate. And I'm not going to get ahead of those discussions. And it really is more for the Defense Department to speak to than us here at the State Department. So they're working our way through exactly how information, the physical nature with which, how the information is going to be shared and how it's going to be coordinated. And I just couldn't begin to speculate about what that looks like. The idea, though, is for 2 things. One, a level of information sharing and targeting information coordination so that we can be sure that military activities are designed to go against the 2 groups that the cessation of hostilities has always held outside the cessation, and that's Daesh and Nusra, period. Number 2, to also help supplement current ongoing efforts out of Geneva on compliance and enforcement of this arrangement going forward. And as I said, And as the Secretary made clear, and it's written in the arrangement, that if at any time either side, the United States or Russia, believes that it's no longer a sustainable arrangement, it's no longer a sustainable arrangement, and it will cease to exist.
And one quick follow-up. You said that the map that outlines which zones are marbleized, which zones are Nusra, and so on, was ironed out, the details in negotiations. What are the plans for when that gets updated? How does that get updated?
Well, the idea, again, the idea is, knowing it's a fluid battlefield, that if there's a joint implementation cell, there will be a sharing of information in real time so that it's updated in real time. Okay? More on this? Are we done with this?
The
Go ahead.
The President of the Philippines has called on the U.S. to withdraw its special forces from southern Philippines, saying he fears they will be targeted by Islamist militants. What's the U.S. response?
I've seen the comments, I've seen them in press reporting, and what I can tell you is that we're not aware of any official communication by the Philippine government to that effect and to seek that result. So we're going to stay in touch with our counterparts in the Philippine government. More critically, we're going to remain committed to our alliance commitments in the Philippines and to that country. We have a long, productive history with the Philippines. I understand that it's not a history without its past troubles. But we're committed to our alliance with the Philippines, and we look forward to working our way through that.
Do I understand it correctly? You're not going to respond to this specifically until they make an official request?
Well, I don't think it's wise to try to make defense relationship decisions based on press reporting of comments.
It's not just
No,
press
I
reporting.
know
You
that,
said-
but what I said is we're not aware of any official request by the Philippine government for this, and so it would be premature for me to react one way or another to it.
Just a few more. Do you share Duterte's concern about the safety of U.S. troops in the Philippines?
We maintain concerns about the safety of our troops all around the world. It's one of the prime considerations of American military leadership.
Would it be correct to say that as you share Duterte's concerns about the safety of troops, you think it is not good enough of a reason to withdraw troops from the Philippines?
Well, again, I don't want to get ahead of decisions that, as far as we know, haven't actually been made or certainly communicated to the United States government. Secondly, this is really more of a matter for the Defense Department if and when such a decision would be transmitted by the Philippine government. But as far as we know, there hasn't been. So it really would be premature to get ahead of that.
Just one last one. In the context of offensive remarks made by Duterte, how was the communication between the two countries? Have they affected communication?
I'm not aware that there's a specific impact on communication. I mean, we have an ambassador there, and he stays in touch daily with his Philippine counterparts and with government officials. As far as I know, that communication continues unabated. I think we've already talked about from the podium some of the unhelpful comments that were made by the president. We've been honest about that and forthright, as friends and allies should do. But again, this is we still believe in the importance of this bilateral relationship. We still believe in the commitments we have from a security perspective under that alliance, and we're going to continue to meet those.
Have they affected relations at all?
I'm not aware that there's been a tangible, practical effect on relations. I think, as I said, we haven't been happy about everything we've heard, and we haven't been afraid to talk about that and to be frank about it. Yeah.
Could you update us
I'll
on,
come back to you in a second, Nike.
could you update us on Brett McGurk's travels? Yesterday he tweeted a photo of the sun setting in Syria. Was he recently in Syria? And last night he tweeted that he was flying overseas. Where is he going?
That's a question we ask ourselves every day. Where is Brett today? I actually don't have an update for his on his schedule, so we'll see if we can get his staff to give us something we can provide to you. I just don't have the details on exactly where he is right now. Thank you.
Yeah, China and Russia, do you have anything on the joint maneuver between Moscow and Beijing starting this week near South China Sea?
Well, we're aware of the exercises that they're conducting bilaterally. It's not unusual for nation states to exercise their militaries or to do so in a bilateral fashion. We do it all the time. The only thing that we're mindful of is that as exercises like this take place, they take place in accordance with international law and don't do anything to raise tensions. But really, these exercises are for the Russians and for the Chinese to speak to.
In your estimation, do you see this as a aim to counter U.S. efforts when Washington is pursuing the so-called Asia-Pacific policy?
Again, I think the goal of the exercise is I'd have to refer you to the Chinese and the Russians to speak to what they're trying to get out of this. Do we view it as a threat? No. Again, militaries exercise. They exercise sometimes together, as long as it's done in accordance with international law and isn't, threatening or being provocative to another third party or nation state. Then, there's nothing that precludes them from doing that. We will and have been and will remain committed to the Asia-Pacific rebalance, which, oh, by the way, Nike isn't just about the military. It's not just about physical security in the Asia-Pacific region. I mean, it's about economic development, and it's about sustainable development goals. It's about diplomatic and political engagement. I mean, there's more to the Asia-Pacific rebalance than just moving most of the Navy over there and being mindful of our security commitments, which are significant. 5 of our 7 treaty alliances are in the Asia-Pacific region. We take that seriously, including the one with the Philippines.
If I may.
Still on that?
Slightly different.
Can I just ask, I want to follow up on what you just said about how joint exercises are fine as long as they follow international law and are not provocative to a third party. Is that right?
I think that's what I said.
So when the North Koreans complain about U.S.-South Korean exercises being provocative, that complaint doesn't count?
No, it doesn't, because they're wrong. These exercises
So
are not
you decide
provocative.
whether or not someone else's complaint about
Those
provocation
exercises,
is valid
you
or
know
not?
darn well, Matt, those
I
exercises,
think
we would,
consistent.
and
I
there
mean,
wouldn't
if
have to
any-
be, come on now, there wouldn't have to be a regular exercising of military capabilities with our allies in the Republic of Korea if the North wasn't conducting nuclear tests and launching ballistic missiles and continuing to destabilize not only the peninsula but the region. But they are defensive. They are by nature defensive exercises
but
because
there's-
unfortunately that's what we need to focus on there.
Fair enough, I understand that, but I mean, so it's not that any third party. It's basically any third party but North Korea can claim provocation.
I don't think that. I don't. I almost can't even believe you are potentially defending North Korea.
I'm not defending anything. I'm just saying the North Koreans consistently say that this is provocative, and over and over again. And you just said in
And they're
terms of Russia and China,
they're consistently
not-
wrong when they say that.
Okay, all right.
If I may, can I?
Sure.
Right. Do you have anything on the reported arms sale to Taiwan? Do you have anything to confirm the veracity of the so-called HEARM, which is a high-speed anti-radiation
Yep, I
missile?
know what it is. As you know, Nike, we don't talk about proposed arms sales one way or the other, so I'm not in a position to confirm that one way or the other. Yeah. Yep.
Secretary Liu said this morning at a Council on Foreign Relations event that we are going to do everything we can to try and keep the pressure on North Korea. Specifically, he was talking about increasing the effectiveness of sanctions. So my question is, what unilateral sanctions are the U.S. considering against North Korea?
I don't have any specific unilateral sanctions to speak to. As you know, we've raised this inside the UN, and we support the UN exploring additional sanctions, but I won't get ahead of any U.S. unilateral decisions that I'm not aware have been made yet. But we are obviously deeply troubled by this most recent test, and we are going to continue to look and evaluate what options are available to us to increase the pressure on the North.
Are you looking at options just through the UN, or are you also looking at unilateral
I simply am not
options?
going to speculate one way or the other. I'm not going to get ahead of decisions that we haven't made as a government, except to say that we have confirmed that we are going to work inside the UN to consider the pursuit of additional UN sanctions, and we'll see where it goes. Okay? Yeah.
So the South Korean's defense ministry said that the North could be ready for another test at any time. What is going to be the U.S.'s response if that gap becomes shorter and shorter between tests?
Well, look, I think you can understand, I'm not, first of all, going to get into discussing intelligence matters here. I've seen those reports, and we're monitoring the situation as best we can, as closely as we can. We continue to urge the North to stop these provocative actions and to do what's right for their people, which is to feed them, to educate them, rather than to spend the resources that they're spending on these kinds of capabilities. But I wouldn't begin to speculate about what might or might not happen in lieu of, in the wake of any future provocative actions that they might take. It's just not prudent for me to get ahead like that. Yeah.
What is the U.S. stand on Balochistan? Because Indian Prime Minister has raised this subject. It is a part of Pakistan, but about human rights there and about the fight for freedom from there. And this has been in the media and everywhere. So what is the U.S. stand on that?
The U.S. government respects the unity and territorial integrity of Pakistan, and we do not support independence for Balochistan.
And there are people and persons, groups here who are working towards it. Do you support, do you tolerate them from the U.S. soil?
Support for?
Baloch
As I said, the government policy is that we support the territorial integrity of Pakistan, and we do not support independence for Balochistan.
Do you have any reaction to the Indian Prime Minister's statements on that particular subject?
I think I just gave you our reaction to events there. Okay, thanks everybody.
Two they're very
almost out.
brief, but one of them does have to do with Syria, and it goes back. This is JIC. It's a JIC question. You say that you can, if you and the Russians agree, then the Syrian Air Force can strike Nusra targets, right? What about Hezbollah and Iranian forces?
Well, so a couple of thoughts there. The Secretary's been in communication with Foreign Minister Zarif, and the Iranians have come out and said that obviously they're in favor of arrangements that would lead to political solutions. I think is rough gist of how they put it, and they have, as you well know, considerable influence over Hezbollah in that group. They are, but purely, frankly speaking, they're not. They are not outside the cessation of hostilities, as is Daesh or al-Nusra, because the cessation of hostilities holds only those groups that are designated as FTO outside of it. So our expectation is...
wait a second, by the UN, because Hezbollah is designated by the UN.
By the UN, but the agreement under the ISSG is UN-designated FTOs.
Okay, no, I understand that, but what I'm asking...
I know what you're asking, hang on. But our expectation is that Iran will use its influence over Hezbollah in a way that is is compliant with the cessation of hostilities, and more specifically with the arrangement that we've reached.
Yeah, but what if Hezbollah wants to go after what it says is Nusra? Is the JIC going to say,
I don't
okay,
believe
Hezbollah,
that's,
you can go ahead and do
again, I don't want to get in, the JIC is, the modalities are still being established. I don't want to get ahead of that. I'm not aware that is going to be something that they're going to coordinate.
Okay, but it goes to the point of whether the JIC is going to, first of all, you're saying that the JIC could greenlight Air Force operations by Syria, a country that is a designated state sponsor of terrorism, against another group that you say is a terrorist.
Through Russian influence on the Assad regime.
So this goes to whether or not the JIC could also greenlight a military operation by Hezbollah, which is a U.S. FTO, against...
We're expecting Iran to use their influence on Hezbollah to comply.
Last thing, and this is Mideast Israel-Palestine question. So your colleague last week, Elizabeth, was not too pleased with the video that Prime Minister Netanyahu released about ethnic cleansing, and saying that the Palestinians wanted to ethnically cleanse what would be their future state. Since that has happened, President Abbas has come out and accused Israel of ethnic cleansing. And I'm just wondering if you have any reaction to that, if you think this is kind of, what, is this just name calling back and forth, or do you have serious concerns about the rhetoric and what it means?
I think we would likewise say we don't find that sort of rhetoric appropriate or helpful. And what we would say, which what we have said, we want, both sides to refrain from provocative rhetoric and actions that are just taking us farther away from a two-state solution. So, yes, we've seen those comments and find them inappropriate and unhelpful as well.
So you do not believe that Israel is ethnically cleansing?
Absolutely not. Okay, thanks, everybody.